Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I am your co-host Nick A.R. Johnson, and with me as always, my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great, Nick. There's sun out right now in
Wow.
Michigan after I haven't seen the sun in a month or two. So, things are looking up. It's finally February. Get to talk hoops with you. So, yeah, I'm excited.
This is both going to make me sound even more ancient than I am, but also is fitting because this is maybe the one time when Sacramento weather and Michigan weather have anything in common, which is for those in the know about Sacramento, the last month there's this thing called the Tool of Fog, which has been wildly more than it usually is. And, used to be, last couple of years I'd wake up and, every once in a while it'd be just really foggy day. It's like, cool, sort of spooky Halloween vibes. It's one thing when it's like every once in a while. Up until about 3 days ago, it was basically 3 straight weeks. And it's a lot less common to not see the sun in Sacramento than it is in Michigan. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. No, that would freak me out. Even like one day of that, be like, all right, like let's wrap it up. Like we're done with
We're
this.
done. We're good.
Like let's get back to normal. Like jokes on us if we get it, but like,
It's
come
like
on.
not funny anymore.
Yeah.
Not funny anymore, he says while laughing. All right, shall we move on to the first of our two players for today?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I was talking about this a bit before we started recording, but the two players that we're covering today have moved up and down my board more than almost anyone else. And the first player is, I think, maybe the player who's moved the most on my board this year. And the second player we're going to talk about is the player who I think moved the most on my board last year. So guys who are very, very confusing to me. And in a couple of cases, I know that that happens to be a consensus confusion. So, Paige, let's go with the guy who you selected first today. I have had Billy Richmond III anywhere from like middle of my first round to late in the second. And I know I'm not alone there. So I'm curious, Paige, why did you decide to go with Billy Richmond III for today's episode?
Yeah, Billy Richmond is one of my favorite glue guys in this draft, Nick. I mean, he's 6'6", 205 pounds. Yes, the box score stats don't really show his impact on the floor, but if you watch the film, I mean, you're like, this guy rocks. I mean, he's a high-level athlete, very, he has plus length, quick hands, great motor. He's also very explosive, and his defensive playmaking. I mean, he's always making these gritty, on the ground winning plays for his teammates, whether it's for himself or for, getting his teammates in table setting for them as well. And he's also not a starter too, Nick, for those that are listening, right? Or not a starter normally, right? So last year,
Sure.
he didn't start any games, but played all 36. This year, he's only started 4 out of Arkansas's 22 games. And just to get into the stats a little bit, he's averaging 8.5 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 1.6 assists on 56, 24, and 75.6 shooting splits. And the one thing that really sticks out to me, Nick, yes, the shot isn't there, but he's an excellent, excellent mover off ball and cutter, and especially in transition, which, I mean, my type of prospects by now. I love those type of prospects that, they are smart without the ball in their hands, and they're great movers. They know how to be in position. They know how to cut, because that is a skill on its own. And Billy Richmond does that effortlessly, which I also, obviously love. He ranked in the excellent percentile off cuts per synergy, 53% off putbacks as well. And last year, he only was 43% off cuts, which is also a huge improvement as well, too. So he's getting better and better each year. And I'm curious about your thoughts, Nick, on his shot. I feel like for him, I think with a ball in his hands, he loves to, be in stride and be off movement, off the bounce, especially on the perimeter while he's attacking to the cup. That's his bread and butter. He does this spin. He does a spin move, to the cup a lot. That's kind of his go-to. Very crafty finisher at the rim. Not shooting the best at the rim. I think, I believe it's like 54% at the rim. I have to check, but and then he's not drawing a lot of fouls either, right? Which, he's a high-level athlete, has great motor, is an absurd defensive playmaker and disruptor, and he's only getting to the line, about 2 times a game, Nick, which, I mean, for that level of an athlete and the power he holds on the defensive end, that should be at least 4 times a game for him as well. But also with his limited minutes here and there and him not, being a starter, he's coming into games, he's been starting more often. But I think that's an area for him on the offensive side just to improve there, because he gets to the rim so effortlessly and off of miss teammate shots too. So that's one area I would like to see him improve at.
So you asked about the shot, and I want to take a roundabout route to get there because I actually have a question for you, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. I feel like Billy Richmond is just a more stratified version of Dalen Swain, by which I mean they're both good at similar things and bad at similar things, but Billy is better at the things that they're both good at and worse at the things that they're both bad at. So you brought up the at the rim numbers, and he was closer to that 50-ish% range last season, but this year, as of right now, he's shooting 68% at the rim. It's one of those things where, again, watching the film is one of those things where, like, immediately you notice the high IQ, you notice the high feel, you notice, even though he doesn't have the ball in his hands that much, he makes good decisions when he does have the ball in his hands. He gets to the rim effortlessly. I mean, you mentioned the spin dribble. That's, a huge thing for him, but also just, one of those things where, because Arkansas has a lot of other high-powered offensive players, there's a lot of openings for him to make those off-ball plays. And, one of maybe the thing that we agree on most in prospect evaluation is how much we love it when guys are really good cutters. Mm-hmm. So, him being, as of right now, he's in the 98th percentile as a cutter. That's hard to do. But the flip side is the shot. And that's sort of, why I wanted to frame the discussion in the Dalen Swain way of, I am a lot less optimistic about Billy Richmond as a shooter than I am about Dalen Swain. And there are some underlying things which are the same. And, you mentioned the free throw thing. And yeah, he needs to get to the line more. But really, it's the thing of, in the sample size we have of Billy Richmond as a free throw shooter, he's 75 for 101. So just about as close to 75% as you can be without actually being 75%, right? The volume is tiny. The 3-point volume is smaller, but he's 10 for 49 for 3-pointers over the course of his 2-year college career, which is negligible volume. And also, just as he was a shade off of 75% from the free throw line, he's also a shade off 20% from 3-point line, which is really not where you want to be. The jumper is not like ugly, but it's not there. And it's one of those things where, again, the same concerns that I have about Swain, I have about Billy Richmond. The flip side is, again, like, if you're just looking for the most extreme version of that kind of player, then maybe it's more likely that Billy Richmond works out because maybe he just has a bigger athleticism advantage, and that's, what matters. And, he can be like a 6'2" guy off the bench for, whatever team ends up getting him and be a really valuable defender, right? He's not in the same echelon. And so I, want to make that clear before I go any further. But the idea conceptually of Cason Wallace to the Thunder of like, this guy shows up, he's not going to be more than our 8th man until and unless Lou Dort moves on, which, stay tuned on that front. But when they were drafting Cason Wallace, right, it's like, okay, we have the 10 pick and, we can take a swing, or we can draft this guy who absolutely everybody knows is going to be a fantastic defender. And the questions are just how much the offensive game translates. Now, the difference there is that, Cason Wallace had real point guard skills. Billy Richmond, for all the good that he does as a connective piece, he's not a point guard, right? And so, on the one hand, him not being a point guard makes the sort of lack of shooting stuff less of an issue to me. But, the other side of it is maybe part of the reason that his offensive numbers don't look as nice as you would like them to is because he's the... not majority, but the play type that he has run the most this season has been as a spot-up shooter. And, that to me reminds me of another deep dives guy in the sense of Andrej Stojakovic, his freshman year at Stanford, where it's like, we're going to use you as a spot-up guy, but I can't do that. Okay, but we're going to use you as a spot-up guy. It's like, well, yeah, no wonder it's not working. He's not good at that. Like, why do you have him doing that? It just, I don't get it. So, like, the percentages, I'm not too worried about. The fact that he shot 9% from 3-point range in conference play, I'm not worried about. Like, really, with Billy Richmond, it's just, can he do enough to make up for the things that he's not good at to let himself get the chance to do the wide variety of things that he's really, really good at?
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great points. And with him too, he's shooting better on guarded catch and shoot attempts than unguarded catch and shoot attempts too. So that tells me too that he's not, you know, nervous to, when he's in open space, obviously he's open a lot for the reason, but when he is in those situations where, he has to get to his spot and, make a 3-ball or whatever it is, that he's confident doing so. And I think his shot looks good, Nick. I mean, I don't have a lot of problem with it. He has a high release, he gets balanced. But I mean, most of his shots too on the 3-point line are kind of rushed too, just because he is such a movement guy. And for him, not being a shooter, right? Cal is actually running a lot of sets for him, right? Double staggers, back screens that he's coming off of and curling and getting to the spot. And I do think he has a nice runner as well. I mean, the sample size is, limited, right? 42.9% on runners this year. Last year, he was 57% on runners with 14 attempts, 63.7% on twos this year, 37 for 65. And last year, he was 55% on two. So I think that's a value add to his game on the offensive end. And I think he has good feel, good touch there. And because he always is, in those situations of following up teammates' missed shots and he's always in the play, I think he's just going to improve there in terms of his usage ability when it comes to the offensive end of the ball. But I think with his shooting too, we're not looking for him to be, lights out shooter, right? We're just looking for a little bit of consistency. And I think his mid-range game and, his runner, obviously a small sample size, but I can see the improvement from last year to this year of just his touch, his mobility, how he feels comfortable in the paint. And also when he's coming off of the perimeter a lot, because Arkansas likes to, play 5 out a lot too, which I think is his bread and butter, because I think he's more, a 3, right? I don't think he's going to be a 4, just because he is so athletic and he can switch and is such a high level defender. But yeah, I think that's a, plus in the Billy Richmond offensive column is that he does have those counters and his mid-range ability to go off of. And then you mentioned too that I was looking at, I think last year, his percentage at the rim, it was more in the 55 range, but 68% at the rim too. And he's so crafty and he has that plus length too. And like, you're going to see his motor on every single play. And when he comes into games, he's an impact player, a lot of, I guess on one broadcast, I forgot which game, I guess, Cal calls him Billy Goat, which is a fun nickname. I haven't heard that before. So, I mean, if Cal is calling you that, he's pretty relied upon, right? But yeah, he's kind of a prospect, as we, talked before we started recording, that he can go any which way, late first round, early second, middle, it kind of just depends on how you value his archetype. But I think, moving forward, you mentioned Cason Wallace. I think as like one of the best high energy guys in the league, impact players, he kind of reminds me in that way of Josh Hart, right? Just because, the second Josh Hart is not on the court, you notice it. And he's always making those hustle plays, putbacks, defensive rebounding. It's a go and get type player, especially in transition. But obviously Josh Hart is a better shooter than Billy Richmond, right? But I think in that type of way, I really like that comparison in terms of just a high energy guy that can come in and, change the outcome of a game for teams.
Yeah, Josh Hart is a much better comp than Cason Wallace. To defend myself, which I shouldn't, I was mainly throwing out Cason Wallace just in the sense of like, yeah, on any other team, he's going to be more than the 8th or 9th man, right? Yeah. But especially in the year that OKC drafted him, it was like, we're just looking to fill out the 9th man spot. Usually, second round / free agency is when teams look to fill out that spot, and not, literally with a lottery pick, but it's one of the things where, hey, they had the pick, so like might as well use it the way that's best for our team, right? But yeah, the thing with Richmond, and I'm really glad that you brought up the mid-range counter stuff. To me, that just sort of sits in a similar realm of, oh, this is a high feel, high IQ player. It's like he never takes a shot where I'm like, what are you like? There hasn't been a shot that I can remember of his where I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you taking that? Right? It's not like, oh, he gets kind of trapped and panics and makes a bad decision, right? It's like he's not throwing up mid-range garbage because, he saw someone stunting on the double coming towards him and he's like, oh, I got to get the shot off now. Got to get it up quick, right? It's like he makes, the box score stuff you mentioned, right? It's like you look at 1.6 assists per game and it's like, it doesn't really jump off the page. But when you add in the context of he's only playing 22 minutes a game and he's playing with, second or third best passer in the country and Darius Acuff, who's going to have the ball in his hands all the time, right? And, alongside a whole lot of other players who are looking to score in, Malik Thomas, Trevon Brazile, Carter Knox, DJ Wack, basically the entire Arkansas roster, right? So it's like the fact that Billy Richmond is, only scoring 8.5 points a game and only averaging 1.5 assists, that to me doesn't tell anywhere close to the full story of the kind of offensive player that he is. Really, the main issue for me is just the connective stuff makes a lot more sense and is a lot easier for him to pull off if teams actually look at him beyond 15 feet. Right. Mm-hmm. And, that was one of the things that I'm glad I'm bringing it up to myself now, because I remembered I wanted to bring it up on the pod of Billy Richmond is a fantastic 8-foot jump shooter. And that's one of those things that when you look at jump shots, it doesn't show up on jump shots, right? Because it's usually classified either as a layup or like a runner or mid-range, whatever. Right. But, the point being, it's not that he can't shoot, right? It's just that he doesn't have the range that you would want for the archetype of player that he is. And, sometimes those players who can't shoot can find ways to be really successful, right? And other times it's, the classic sort of, oh, if only he could shoot, that, for every 100 prospects that you say that about, like 3 of them pan out, right? But I don't know. And that's part of why Billy Richmond is so confusing for me, because, Dalen Swain was confusing enough, as I talked about when we talked about Dalen Swain 2 weeks ago. And to find an even more extreme version of that kind of player, it just makes it even weirder. I will say in Swain's, to Swain's benefit, he is much better at just being the engine of generating his own offense than Billy Richmond is. The flip side of that is when we're talking about NBA evaluation as opposed to how valuable you are as a college basketball player, that's one of the biggest distinctions is between who can be a high volume, high efficiency college scorer and who can be a high volume, high efficiency NBA scorer. And so if scoring is not what you're drafting him for, that's a lot less of a problem, right? But again, the flip side is the extremes are so extreme that it's like, maybe he's a good enough athlete that it doesn't matter. Maybe he's not a good enough athlete and the shooting becomes more of a problem. And, he cycles through the end of a bench a few times before he's out of the league. I don't know. And that's why I've moved them up and down my board so much, is because I really don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I look at Billy Richmond as, okay, he's an elite defender. I kind of categorize him in kind of like a ball hawk type of defender, just because his eyes are always locked into the ball, to his defender, to the weak side, into rotation. And he had an insane play against Duke earlier this year that it was when Caden Boozer was driving into the paint. Billy Richmond collapsed on him to help. And then Caden Boozer obviously had to kick it out because, Billy Richmond is there. What are you going to do? And then Caden Boozer kicked it out. Duke spun around. Billy went to his man in the corner, but was still in great help position. And then Dame Sarr got to the baseline as, he does. And then Billy Richmond, rotated once more again. It was timed the block perfectly to deny Dame Sarr at the rim. So that just tells me, like, he is such a high IQ player that you're going to look at him and his archetype. High IQ, glue guy, has insane motor, has feel, touch around, can finish around the rim. I think he's a great value add, especially in the second round to any team. And I think, Cal relies a lot on him too. And he's improved from last year to this year. And I think if you're like, the shot's not cooked at all either. I mean, it would be different if, he's not getting to the line. Obviously he needs to get to the line more, but if he was getting to the line, one time a game and, his playmaking feel wasn't there. I think obviously Dalen Swain is a better playmaker than Billy Richmond is. But I think he has moments where he is, especially on the defensive end of the ball, and how much of a chaos disruptor he is there. But if you're looking at all the great things about him and then, the little flaws here and there on the offensive side, obviously the shooting, playmaking, and not the free throw rate as well. you're kind of trying to balance what you value more at the NBA level. But I think since he is such a great athlete too, he kind of has a little bit more to go off of, that people aren't going to write him off just because he isn't as, well-rounded on the offensive end as he is on the defensive end.
Yeah, he covers a lot of gaps. And the question is just, does him covering those gaps leave more openings than he covers by covering those gaps? And defensively, I'm not worried at all. Yeah. Like, again, like, oh, okay, low defensive playmaking numbers in terms of steals and blocks. Again, it's like, that's why with defense, you really do have to watch the film, because, we've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again, of like, some guys really gamble for steals. And so if you're only looking at who has the most steals per game, it's like, there's a big difference between the Kingston Fleming's 2 steals a game and the prime Russell Westbrook 2 steals a game.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think with him, I think he's going to continue to go up and down our boards for the remainder of the season, which is fun, honestly, because I think that just, you kind of have to hone in more, and it makes you question, makes you think, it makes, these prospects challenge you in different ways as the season progresses, which is fun, right? Some prospects, you're like, oh, like, I want him to improve, or like, I'm good at him at this spot or whatever. And then, by the time, February, obviously March comes around, you kind of have your lottery range kind of not locked in, but more, stable than, the other, 30 through 60 players. Right. But I think with him, he has a lot more to gain than to lose, honestly, as the season progresses.
And, you mentioned as the season progresses, but also when it comes time to athletic testing and combine stuff, I'm willing to bet Billy Richmond III will be helping himself when it comes to the combine.
Oh, for sure. I know. I can't wait for that.
Although the flip side of that is, if he happens to go 10 of 25 on the 25 3-pointers, that is surely a good enough sample size to tell who's a good shooter or not, then, people will say, oh, you can't shoot, never going to be able to shoot. I was like, okay, fine.
Absolutely.
That's me getting to some combine cynicism. So let's move on before we go down that rabbit hole. Shall we move on to player number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I mentioned when introing the last section that Billy Richmond has made me move more on my board this year than anybody else, and that the second player we were going to talk about was the player who moved the most on my board last year. And that is Donnie Freeman of the Syracuse Orange, who, was 8th in his high school class, and who I don't remember exactly where off the top of my head, but, somewhere in that lottery grouping heading into last year. And, he fell off my board, among others, relatively quickly. I think I held on to hope a bit longer last year as a first-round guy than some. And, he was sort of off my radar for most of this season until, I've talked about it before, but, when I sort of do my big board overhaul in January, and I was like, okay, his stats look a lot better. This is interesting. Let's check him out. And, I ended up watching the Syracuse Georgia Tech game, which turned out to be the best game that Donnie Freeman has had so far this season. Spoiler alert, the player is Donnie Freeman. But then, as part of preparing for today's podcast, I, watched the most recent Syracuse game, which was Syracuse, North Carolina. And I've already done longer on my intro segment than I wanted to, so I'm going to save that rant for a little bit later and throw to you. Paige, what are your thoughts on Syracuse big man Donnie Freeman?
Yeah, so I saw Donnie Freeman his junior year at St. John's. It was back at I'm trying to think of the name of the tournament.
Sorry, just quickly, junior year of high school.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you say St. John's, and I'm like, wait, what?
Sorry,
and
yeah.
It's like, oh, St. John's High School.
Yeah, sorry for everyone that's listening. St. John's College High School, his junior year high school in DC. I went to, I think it was Champions Classic, but it was out in San Diego, and St. John's was playing, so I got to watch him. At that time, he was 4-star recruit. Obviously, all the intangibles, people are like, this guy is, the real deal. He can shoot, versatile, 6'9". Obviously, back, he's gained weight, muscle from 4 years from now, but and then he could shoot, he could dribble, he could pass, but now when I'm looking at him, right, obviously he's had injuries that he's dealt with, had the season ending injury last year. I forget what, a Jones fracture. For those that don't know, it's a foot injury that kind of is due to limited blood flow that he underwent last year. So season-ending surgery. And then, he just came back from injury that he had beginning of January as well. So, with him, he's so skilled, Nick, and you love him on the offensive end of what he can do at times, right? But then he makes you kind of want to rip your hair out because of his decision making and what he does for Syracuse to give him a little bit of a bump, right? Because he is kind of the lone light spot that Syracuse has. So he's, he has to do a lot for the Orange, right? But just to go into the numbers a little bit, he's averaging 18.6 points, 7.4 rebounds, 1.3 assists on 50.9, 34, and 78.9 shooting splits. And he's also doing that with a usage rate of 28.92. And he's played the exact amount of games from last year to this year, 14 games in total, and he has about the same assist to turnover ratio as Tunic. This year, 18 assists to 32 turnovers. Last year, he had about the same with 19 assists. So his decision making is kind of all over the place for me because he is so skilled. He can shoot the three ball. He's shooting, over 70% at the rim last year and this year. He's so crafty. He's so versatile and athletic. But his decision making, he just wants the ball every single time he goes down the court. And he's not looking to do anything else, which is a problem. When you're looking at, he's 6'9", 205 pounds, you're like, this guy's awesome. Like, he can shoot the ball. He can finish at the rim. He's long, athletic. But that's basically all he does, right? He's not looking to make his teammates better most of the time. He's not the assists he does in his playmaking is usually like the first read, right? He's not looking to make the second, third, winning plays like that. But he's the only, prospect, right, that on Syracuse that can, create for himself, right? So he's doing a lot with a little. So I think role and scheme plays a lot into it as well. But if you just look at his body language and, the type of player he is, sometimes he gets thrown into, being the small ball five for Syracuse too. For college, it's fine at times, Nick, but for the NBA level, absolutely not. Just because I like when prospects are challenged into positions and schemes that they're not really used to, right? Because I look at, Donnie Freeman as a modern four at the NBA level, right? Not a small ball five, but when he is thrown in those positions at Syracuse, I do mind it, but at the same time, I don't, because I like when, especially a player like him, is challenged in those ways. But he's also asked to do a lot. So I'm curious, Nick, I think I kind of rambled and ranted a lot because he kind of goes up and down for me, but I'm curious to see what you say.
So we have said, we as in you and I, and we also as no ceilings, have said many times before, don't get too high on a prospect's best game, don't get too low on their worst game, which I immediately violated that rule by mentioning that the Donnie Freeman game that I'd seen that led me to pick him for today was the, one game against Georgia Tech that it was his best game of the season. But I am truly struggling to come up with, off the top of my head, with the possible exception of Darren Peterson's first half against BYU, I am struggling to come up with a game I have watched for a prospect that more perfectly encapsulates the positives and negatives of a player than watching Donnie Freeman play against UNC on Monday. So if you did not watch that game and you want to, get a primer on, why are people saying such nice things about Donnie Freeman? Why are people saying such negative things about Donnie Freeman? In the 35 minutes that he was on the court in that game, you will get as full of a picture of him as a prospect than I can ever recall seeing for one prospect in one game. In the first half of Syracuse at North Carolina, Donnie Freeman had 18 of Syracuse's 32 points. More than half the offense by himself. And it wasn't just chucking. He had 18 points on 9 shots. He was really efficient. He had 6 rebounds in the first half, played almost the entire first half, and Syracuse was down 12 at halftime. 46-32 at halftime. Donnie Freeman had more than half of Syracuse's points.
And if I can add, Nick,
go for it.
He made an insane bank shot 3 over Caleb Wilson down in the first quarter against UNC too, which was like okay. I mean, he's already having great first half, and then he makes that, and you're like, okay, Donnie.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
No, very important add that it was more than just the stat line. It was going into halftime with the, oh, yeah, I see it. I get it. In the second half, he commits a dumb foul within like 50 seconds. Like, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was extremely early. And he gets pulled for about 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes, the UNC lead just absolutely balloons. Like, it goes from 12 points to like 25-30. Donnie Freeman comes back in, and it was fascinating to watch on both ends of the floor because Syracuse would bring the ball up, Donnie Freeman would get into post-up position, and he would call for the ball. Like, I'm not even sure I'm exaggerating when I say literally every single trip up the floor for the Syracuse Orange. And, he didn't get past the ball that much while he was standing in post-up position with his hands up like, me, got my ball. And then, Syracuse would run back on defense. And, I've said before my issues with evaluating individual versus scheme defense. And I don't think any team in the, decade of my draft evaluation has made that more difficult than the Syracuse Orange. But there were at least 5 possessions on defense in that second half where Donnie Freeman had his arms outstretched, was in a defensive stance, and was basically looking out at the right wing of like, I'm looking at you on the right wing, but I've got my arms out. I'm in a defensive stance so I can run quickly, recover to the guy in the corner. Here's the problem. There was no offensive player for the University of North Carolina on either of those spots. It wasn't just that he was pretending to guard 2 guys and was actually guarding 1. He was pretending to guard 2 guys when there was nobody there.
Yeah.
Nobody. And so, I mentioned the first half, right? 18 points on 9 shots and 6 rebounds. By the end of the game, he had played 35 minutes. So not literally, but almost literally every minute except for that brief stretch to start the second half where he was in foul trouble and Coach Autry sat him, right? Finishes the game with 23 points on 14 shots, right? So notice the difference in efficiency there. And 8 rebounds, so 2 in the second half. Every single one of his rebounds was on the defensive glass. And furthermore, the point in the game where, again, the North Carolina lead ballooned when he sat with the foul trouble, right? I'm not blaming him for that. But when Syracuse did make a late run that cut the lead to single digits, and it ended up being 87-77, but, it was single digits, up until like, late final second free throw garbage, whatever, right? It was a single digit game. And Syracuse made that comeback with the exception of one play where he actually got to the rim and finished a layup. Basically every single one of those offensive possessions was Donnie standing around with his arms up calling for the ball and them not passing to him and Syracuse finding a way to score that did not involve him. And to his credit, the defense looked better in the second half of the second half. There were a lot fewer of those I'm pretending to guard 2 people and guarding nobody possessions, like when Syracuse was actually making their comeback. But all of what I've just said in the last 3 minutes or so encapsulates the Donnie Freeman experience from start to finish. It's like almost any tool that you could want to see is there. And when he's really locked in, he does a lot of things that a whole lot of other prospects can't do, which is why he was 10th in his high school, 8th in his high school class, and why he was, top 10 or lottery on, my and many other people's boards heading into last season. The toolkit is there. But when you watch second halves or quarters or stretches that look like, the first 7 or 8 minutes after he returned from that foul trouble in the UNC game, like the first half is why you would consider Donnie Freeman as, first round, maybe even, mid first round lottery. And the second half is the complete and total justification for if he goes undrafted, I would say, yeah, I get it, And it's just so... See, the difference between Billy Richmond and Donnie Freeman is Billy Richmond isn't frustrating. It's just like, oh, it'd be nice if he could shoot.
Yeah.
Donnie Freeman is like, I know you can do better than this, dude. Like, come on, man. And it's like, that's not the kind of feeling that you want to have about a prospect who had truly a really great first half against one of the better college basketball teams in the country. And not just, going up against their worst player. Like, he and Caleb Wilson were a cross-match, and they were giving each other fits, right? It wasn't just Caleb dominating and Donnie, just sitting there and being like, yeah, okay, I guess you're going to, score over me 74 times, right? Like, Donnie outscored Caleb in the first half, and he outscored the entire rest of his teammates combined. And then you watch the second half, and it's like, wow, Syracuse made this really impressive comeback, and he was invisible for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with him too, and he got killed occasionally on duck-ins too by Vassar, Wilson too, which like cannot happen. Like when a big man like modern four like Donnie Freeman like allows that, it's so apparent, and you're kind of like, what are you doing, dude? Like you're pulling teeth with me. Like you're so skilled, you're so versatile, you can score at all three levels, and then you let that happen on defensive end. Like that's just an effort play, right? And obviously Vassar's taller than him, right? But I mean Caleb Wilson too. I mean, you had such a phenomenal first quarter, and then you go right back down, right? So it's kind of like a mix of emotions with him. And the game before that, Notre Dame, which was one of his worst games of the season, right? And he didn't shoot the ball well, didn't have that many shot attempts too. 7 points on 1 of 4 from the field, 1 of 2 off twos, and 0 of 2 from the 3-point line, but also got to the line 9 times and was 5 or 9 from the line. But in that game too, you mentioned the stupid foul he made at UNC at the beginning. Notre Dame, he did a legal screen and kind of just chucked the guy, and he just fell over, and you're kind of like, what are you doing? Like and like Syracuse won that game, but like those little things here and there, it's like frustration, right? You're not shooting the ball well, and then you make defensive errors like that cost the ball up to the Fighting Irish hands. It's like you're such a key piece to this orange team, to the Syracuse orange team, and you're the main production guy, right? You're asked to do a lot, and then you make plays like that. Like that's not a leader, right? And if he's trying to get into more of that role, it's like you can't make those plays. So, and those type of plays just come up again and again and again. And that just goes back to, his decision making, which is like all over the place for me, especially as a playmaker too, because, if the shot's not falling, how else are you impacting the game? And against Notre Dame too, like UNC, all of his rebounds came to the defensive end. And as a defensive rebounder, I do like his effort there because he uses his 7'3" wingspan, really just gets in there. And he's such a go and get type of prospect too, Nick. He's great in transition, can bring the ball up for himself, can also, has that pick and pop ability as well, which is, lethal when he makes it, right? And he, does that a lot too. And I think with him too, I would like to see him more in pick and roll actions as well, utilizing that short roll, making, the second or third read, but that's just where he needs to continue to develop, because of right now he's making that first read, and that's kind of his like fourth or fifth option, because his first option is, to go to the cup or to shoot it. And one of his, many counters too, or what he kind of relies on too, Nick, is like he loves to play bully ball, coming off of the perimeter, right? He'll bully his matchup kind of into the paint to a spot where he wants it, and then he'll either rise up or hit a turnaround J, or, get closer to the rim by using, both of his hands dribbling wise, which, is a good sign too, coming from, a 6'9" guy that is such skilled as he is. But it's also like, okay, pass out of that, right? Make some more reads, hit cutters off the ball. And, time and time again, he's not doing that. He's kind of just, looking out for himself in that sense a lot, which kind of discourages me.
I'm really glad that you brought up the pick and roll stuff. So for the more film leaning people, just, watch the full Syracuse UNC game. For the stats people, here is my short version, of the rant that I had about the film. Here's the stats version of that. His 4 most common play types per synergy this season are virtually identical in terms of the number of attempts. Like it's from 33 to 40. All 4 of his most common play types are in that range of plays, which I've said before, like sample size under 30 is not really instructive. Sample size, once you start getting past 30, is when you start getting statistical significance to some sort of degree. So he has that threshold in all 4 of his most common play types. At the top, 2 play types that are tied, literally 40 possessions for each of them: spot up and transition. 42nd percentile on spot ups, 72nd percentile in transition. The next 2 are also virtually identical: 34 for one of them, 33 for the other. 34 pick and roll man possessions, 63rd percentile, 33 post ups, 23rd percentile. And that tells me the whole story right there is, okay, so of your 4 most common play types, and by the way, just missing the list at number 5, he's an 82nd percentile cutter. Okay, so those are the top 5, but we'll call it the top 4 for my little sample size thing. If you're really good at 2 of those, and between bad and terrible at the other 2, they should not be equivalent. Mm-hmm. You should not be taking as many post-ups as you are rolls in the pick and roll.
Yeah.
And if he'd actually gotten the ball as many times as he called for it, he would have twice as many post-ups as anything else. But it's it's one thing to be like, I'm Joel Embiid and I have my hand up on every possession because the guy guarding me is 6'5". It's another thing to be well below, bad. He's shooting 32% on post-ups this year.
Yeah.
And he's taking them, at a similar rate to finishing in the pick and roll where he's averaging 1.15 points per possession. Again, in the 63rd percentile, significantly above average. And it's okay, if you want the film, look at, Syracuse UNC. If you want the numbers, look at those 4 stats that I just gave you. And it just tells the story of the frustration of, man, you're so good at so many different things. And on every possession, you are choosing actively to say, please give me the ball so I can do the thing that I'm worst at. And the rebounding stuff, 7.5 rebounds a game, fewer than 1 offensive rebound. His offensive rebounding percentage has been less than 5 each of his 2 seasons at Syracuse. And this year it's at 3.5%. 3.5% is like a, big guard kind of number.
Yeah.
It's not a number for a 4-5.
Yeah. I mean, he's just doing too much, right? On the offensive end, and he's not honing in on what he's great at, which, is his pick and pop ability. He's a great finisher at the rim, and he's not strong enough yet, Nick, to, really excel in post-up situations. He's more of a turnaround dribble jumper guy, but I also am not that confident in his handle just because I think his processing ability and decision-making isn't where I want it to be yet. So I kind of go like this a little bit when he does have the ball in his hand and he's dribbling, more than, 2 to 4 dribbles, right? Not saying he has a bad handle by any means, but he just gets very sped up in, high energy situations, especially when, he's tasked to, okay, I'm in transition. I can obviously score the basket because I'm such a great finisher at the rim, but I also have a teammate that's trailing me, looking for a lob to me, and then he just coughs it up a lot of the time, right? Because he's not making those split second decisions, which, for guys like Billy Richmond, that's effortless for them. So I think with him and his decision-making, that just needs to go up a couple levels for me to make me, confident with his handle. And for, his dribble jumper too, it's a small-ish sample size, but, he's shooting 62.5% off dribble jumpers, 58% off twos. But like you mentioned, half of his, pick and roll game is off pick and pop actions. He's shooting 41% off pick and pops, with 22 field goal attempts. So he's not really looking to create much else for other people. He's kind of just looking to get his shot off of, a lot of these situations. And obviously we've mentioned throughout this podcast that if it wasn't for him, Syracuse wouldn't have been in the UNC game, right, for the first half. But then you mentioned too, he was kind of non-existent in the second half, and he only didn't play 5 minutes a game, and they kind of held their own without him because of just his decision-making, really kills the momentum of Syracuse a lot. So yeah, he's a type of prospect that you can go up and down with too. And it's kind of funny that, we didn't plan, picking high movers or high risers or fallers, Nick. So this is going to be a fun episode to post in the upcoming days.
Yeah, I do want to circle back on the post playmaking because I think that's a really vital point for multiple reasons. And the biggest of which, and, again, I'm bringing him up specifically as the pinnacle of this is the best possible version of this as a comparison point for Donnie Freeman. In his rookie year in the NBA, Joel Embiid had 3.8 turnovers per game. It didn't quite lead the league, but was pretty close, against 2 assists per game. And the formula was very simple. Even though he had a spectacular rookie year, was third in voting despite playing literally fewer than half of his team's games, right? The problem was teams could just swarm him in the post and he couldn't deal with it, right? Because he didn't quite have the passing out of the post thing in his bag yet. And so, him getting to the place where he's at as a passer has been, vital for multiple reasons, obviously, but I think for no reason more than the fact of, hey, if we're going to run offense through a big man in the post, at a bare minimum, even if he's this fantastic scorer, he has to at least be able to pass out of the double team, right? And that was a huge question for the first year and a half of Joel Embiid's career. And then, by year 3, he'd pretty much figured it out. And, MVP candidate, all-star, whatever, all of the above, right? Donnie Freeman currently, and this is going to sound, way meaner and more aggressive than I mean it to be, but he's currently doing neither of those things.
Mm-hmm.
He's shooting really inefficiently out of the post. He's picking his choices poorly of when to post up. And when he gets swarmed in the post, he's not hitting the passes out of the double team.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's one of those things that's particularly confounding for NBA evaluation purposes, because it's like, on the one hand, no NBA team is going to rely on him as much as Syracuse relies on him offensively. So, okay, he's not going to get all of those post-up possessions and, not to put too fine a point on it, he's not going to waste all those post-up possessions because NBA teams aren't going to let him get those possessions. But, again, it's like the flip side of the Billy Richmond thing of like, hey, he'll make these connective passes. Maybe he's not the best at this area of offense, but, at least that when the ball touches his hands, he'll make the right decision and he'll move it on to whoever's hands the ball should be in. I have the opposite of that confidence with Donnie Freeman. And so it's one of those things where, it's like there is a version of Donnie Freeman that is steal of the draft contender, right? Like, someone picks him at 53 and, they have an injury game 3 of his rookie year. And he'd been impressive in summer league and he'd been making better choices. It's like, he has all of the possible tools for, man, if this guy figures it out, he's going to be one of the most undervalued players in the draft class. The problem is there's just so many bridges that I have to cross to get to that point. Whereas with Billy Richmond, it's very simple. Can he shoot? Okay, I think everything else is good enough that he'll figure it out. With Donnie Freeman, it's like, okay, can he make better decisions? And he can get slightly better as a three-point shooter? And credit to him, unlike other big men that we've talked about, he doesn't have the volume problem, right? He's taking almost 4 3-pointers a game. And, 34% is not fantastic, but when you're taking them at volume, and as you mentioned, you are a threat in the pick and pop, then, that's the willingness to take them is a huge part of him being threatening in pick and pop situations. But, if a team gets him in is like, you are only running pick and rolls, either you are dunking out of the pick and roll, which, by the way, he's shooting 73.5% at the rim this season, right? It's like, okay, you are only taking those shots either at the rim or you are popping in the pick and pop and you're taking that shot and that's it. And if that happens, then I could look really stupid for having him as a late second, potentially undrafted guy. The flip side of that is it's very possible that everything that we are both worried about comes to pass. And if everything that we're worried about comes to pass, he's just not an NBA player.
I think best case scenario for Donnie Freeman, stealing wise, Nick, is that he's a Naz Reid type of player. Obviously, Naz Reid is 50 pounds more than Donnie Freeman. But if you look at, Naz Reid, he was undrafted, one and done at LSU, right? But their stats are pretty similar, Nick. So Naz Reid in the 2018-19 season at LSU, his shooting splits 46.8, 33.3, where is it? 72.7 from the free throw line, right? And he was shooting 2.5 3-point attempts per game at a 33% clip, getting to the line about 3.8 times per game, 73%, similar to Donnie Freeman, right? And he also averaged a lot more defensive rebounds, right? 4.7 rebounds, 0.9 assists to 2.5 turnovers, which with Donnie is kind of similar, right? He's 18.6 points. Naz Reid averaged 13.6 points too. So they had that production going for them as well. And then obviously on the rebounding sense too, 7.2, 7.4 with Donnie. And then the assist to turnover ratio was very similar as well. So I think that's the higher end outcome for him, is being that Naz Reid type player. But I will say with Naz, he has that motor and he has that winning play mentality. And, when Minnesota, made that run in the playoffs, he was knocking down threes at an absurd clip, and he has a lot more to go off of, Nick, just because he does have that strength and size that Donnie Freeman can't, and especially on post-up situations too. He's great at attacking the glass, and he's also a great, pick and pop, delay action type of big man too, that, if Donnie improves, his attitude on that sense of the floor, is kind of that connective piece, and kind of, sways away, which I think he will do at the NBA level, that, he's not going to have the ball in his hands a bunch of times. He's not going to be relied on to have this insane offensive output that he has with Syracuse at the NBA level. I think that high-end outcome of Naz Reid is, what I could kind of picture, Donnie Freeman becoming.
Yeah, Naz Reid is the perfect high-end comp. I couldn't agree more. And, strength differences aside, if it works, it will look very, very similar. Great at the basket, can pick and pop, will take those shots, can work as a sort of small ball five if everything works, maybe, but for the most part is a floor spacing 4. Yeah, no, I think that's perfect if it works. And I think really the question is just, as you mentioned, right? Like, motor was not a concern for Naz Reid. And they're, just on the most basic level of, hey, strength difference aside, right? If there's one guy who you have every reason to believe will put in the effort, and, you can see it on the court, you presume it's happening off the court, right? Versus, and again, this is unfair. I don't have any intel on Donnie Freeman. I have no reason to assume that he's anything less than a wonderful, hardworking human being. But it's like, with Naz Reid, it was easy to see this is someone who really cares and is really going to put in the work. And with Donnie Freeman, it's like, in the first half, I thought, yeah, he's getting it together. He's figuring it out. This is nice. And then the second half is like just falling back on all of the reasons why I was worried in the first place.
Yeah. No, I agree too. And, with Naz Reid's story too, undrafted to, what he came about in the most recent years. I mean, he had people in Minnesota getting tattoos of his name. So, I mean, his, impact overall, in his story too, like that's hard to do. I mean, coming from undrafted, and like, as you mentioned, I don't have any intel on, Donnie Freeman either in terms of, who he is as a person, but it takes a special type of player in person to, come from being undrafted and create that own path for himself, to, where Naz Reid is now. So, I think high-end outcome, I could definitely see that for him, but I don't know if I trust that as much as like, what is his floor, right? So you kind of have to weigh those odds a little bit.
All right, shall we move on to quick hits and wrap things up?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, quick hits. So, Paige, you had the honor of watching the undefeated Miami (Ohio) team last week. So yeah, give us some thoughts on going out to see one of the few remaining undefeated teams in person.
Yeah, so even that it was 5.5 hours to get to Miami, Ohio from Detroit, it was well worth it, Nick. I mean, Oxford, Ohio is a gem of a city. It's amazing how the town and fans and atmosphere is just rallied around this squad. On Saturday, they played Northern Illinois. They were up by only 2 points at halftime, and then kind of rallied and came together. And Travis still has this team that, every person on the team can, dribble drive, can kick out, can shoot the 3 ball. And it's just very, it's such a team effort every single time, Nick. And, and the city, the fans really feel that grittiness of this team. And, they're one of 2 undefeated teams left with Arizona. And they just got a much needed win against Buffalo yesterday. So they're 23-0. Best start in program history, ranked in the top 25 for the first time in 26 years. And it's just a really great feel-good story, Nick. And I went and saw their facilities. They have some of the best facilities I've seen for a MAC school as well. I was very, very impressed with what they're building there. And then Millett Hall was sold out, had, I believe, just under 12,000 people in attendance. So, I mean, it was rocking. It's one of the most underrated environments in college basketball that I've been to. So it was such a great time overall. I will say, though, Peter Suter, he definitely had my attention. I mean, he is just a dog, Nick. I mean, he's just the glue, the bread and butter to this Miami, Ohio team. He's telling his teammates where to go. He's always in position. He's making those winning plays left and right. And he's also a great and crafty finisher at the rim. And he's just a leader. And obviously his dad was a good player as well. So he has that to go off too. But I really enjoyed watching them this past Saturday. And I'm excited for them to hopefully make a run in March Madness.
So I'm curious for your thoughts on Cincinnati's own Eian Elmer, who is, if anybody from this team gets drafted and plays in the NBA, it's probably going to be Eian Elmer. Just, for quick reference, 6'6" forward, just a hair under 50% from the field, 41% from three, just a hair under 80% from the free throw line. He's got a lot of those kind of 3-and-D traits, but I'm curious what your thoughts were on seeing him in person.
Yeah, I mean, he looks a lot stronger until I know he's 6'6", about 215-ish. But I mean, he's a big guy for a forward, Nick. And granted, it wasn't his best game against Northern Illinois for Miami University as a whole. They were only about shooting less than 20% from three the whole game. So they kind of had to find different ways to impact the game when their shot wasn't falling. And Elmer, he's a guy that, he steps up big time when they needed him. And it kind of, the first 15 minutes of the game, I was like, will this be the game? Like, I hope I'm not like the bad luck charm and witness their first loss. Like, I'm going to be banned from Oxford. But he really stepped up in those ways and made those type of winning plays. You're like, okay, this is a guy I can count on. And yeah, he had 6 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals. He does a little bit of everything, right? And he really gave Northern Illinois trouble, especially on the perimeter, because he is that type of defender that can get away in a hurry and can make your life hell on the perimeter too, just because he has a long wingspan, he has a great base and foundation. And I was really impressed with his versatility up close as well. And he almost had an insane poster dunk too. It barely missed, but I mean, if he would have made that, I mean, Millett Hall would have been jumping.
It's funny that you mentioned that you were worried about being the bad luck charm. I literally only just realized this as I was pulling up game logs for Eian Elmer. Miami of Ohio, in their last 5 games, they have had 3 of them decided by a single possession.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them have gone to overtime. And then there was the 4th game, which was the one that you saw.
Yeah.
So it's like literally every single one of their last 5 games, except for the one that you saw, was the one where it was like actually genuinely in doubt in the final moments. So, hey, glad they figured it out so you didn't have to feel like the bad luck charm. But
I know. I was holding my breath a little bit.
Good news is that if one possession had gone different in their last game against Buffalo or the game before against Massachusetts, you wouldn't have had to worry about it.
Yeah, and I was talking to some of the students in the student section, and I was like, what does this season, mean to the town, to you guys as students, coming together to, rally around your team? And they're like, well, they call us the Spread Hawks. And I'm like, the Spread Hawks? What are you guys talking about? They're like, because we always cover the spread. Sports winners. So I'm like, maybe.
We are so cooked as a society.
I know. I was like, oh, okay. Interesting.
Oh my God. Okay. Well.
But I think that's the perfect way to end this episode on, because I was generally like, what in the world? And like, I'm Gen Z, and I was like, the Spread Hawks, what?
Well, see, the thing is, when people heard us start the podcast with weather and start the quick hits section with travel difficulties, I think everybody who listens thinks we're both at least a decade older than we are. Yeah. So I am not Gen Z for the record, but even still, that's wow. That's
I think having Spread Hawks as the last segment of this pod makes us at least 5 to 10 years younger, hopefully.
Yeah, our FanDuel. No, kidding. I think that will, yeah, I think that's the best note we can end it on. But just in case, anything else before we wrap up today?
No, all good.
All right, so she is Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at Paige Otto _, and you can find her written work over on NoCeilingsNBA.com. You can find me on social media at NBA Johnson, and you can find my written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com as well. If you've been enjoying the show, please be sure to rate and review in whatever podcast player you might be getting this into your ear holes from. That was a really awkward sentence, but whatever. 5 stars, always appreciated, always appreciated. If you are tuning in on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. We will have plenty more videos in the months, weeks, days, years, whatever to come. So be sure to check us out there. And if you have any feedback on the deep dives specific portion of the podcast, feel free to reach out to either of us via the aforementioned social media platforms, or you can send me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.